Imagine you're a soldier. You've survived a world war. You've trained with one of the most famous machine guns of the era. And now your government gives you a new mission. Your enemy, thousands of giant birds. It sounds like a joke. But in 1932, the Australian government really did send soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns into Western Australia to deal with enormous flocks of emus damaging farmers' crops. The army expected an easy victory. Instead, the birds scattered, the guns jammed, the ammunition disappeared, and the soldiers discovered that their enemy was much harder to defeat than anyone expected. This is the bizarre story of the Great Emu War. The story begins in Western Australia in 1932. The country was struggling through the Great Depression. Many former soldiers had been settled as farmers in the developing wheat-growing regions of Western Australia. But farming there was difficult. Then came a new problem: emus. Thousands of these enormous flightless birds moved into agricultural areas. They were attracted to the wheat, and they caused damage not only by eating crops, but by trampling them and breaking through fences. Contemporary accounts and later histories describe an emu population in the region numbering in the tens of thousands. For the farmers, this wasn't funny. They were struggling to survive. So they asked the government for help, and they didn't ask for bird experts. They asked for something much more dramatic: the army. The request reached Australia's Minister of Defence, Sir George Pearce. The government agreed to provide military assistance. The plan was extraordinary. A small detachment of Royal Australian Artillery would travel to Western Australia. They would bring 2 Lewis light machine guns and approximately 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The operation was placed under the command of Major G.P.W. Meredith. His small team included Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. From a military perspective, it seemed almost absurdly one-sided. 3 soldiers, 2 machine guns, thousands of rounds, against birds. What could possibly go wrong? Quite a lot. On November 2nd, 1932, the soldiers reached the Campion area. They spotted around 50 emus. The plan was simple: get the birds into range, then open fire. But the emus had other ideas. As the farmers attempted to herd them toward the soldiers, the flock broke apart. Instead of remaining in one enormous target, the birds scattered into smaller groups. Some disappeared into the landscape. Others ran in different directions. The soldiers fired, but hitting fast-moving emus across open country was far harder than expected. The first day produced only limited results. The army had discovered its first problem. The enemy wasn't going to stand still. Then came the opportunity the soldiers had been waiting for. More than 1,000 emus were reportedly seen moving toward a watering point. The soldiers prepared an ambush. This was it. A huge flock, a fixed location. Machine guns ready. The soldiers waited. The birds approached. The guns opened fire. And then, one of the machine guns jammed. Only around a dozen birds were killed before the flock scattered. Think about that. The Australian army had brought machine guns to defeat a flock of birds. And one of the most important weapons in the operation stopped working at exactly the wrong moment. The emus escaped. The soldiers tried different tactics. They moved. They waited. They attempted ambushes. They even experimented with mounting a machine gun on a truck. But the Australian landscape wasn't a battlefield designed for conventional warfare. The emus were fast. They were difficult to herd, and when threatened, they could scatter over huge distances. instead of one giant target. The soldiers repeatedly found themselves chasing dozens of smaller groups, and every time the birds scattered, the effectiveness of concentrated machine gun fire fell dramatically. The army had underestimated the terrain, and it had underestimated the animals. Soon, the story became a political embarrassment. Newspapers began reporting on the strange military operation. The phrase Emu War began to appear, and politicians started making jokes. One politician reportedly suggested that the soldiers should receive medals. Another joked that the medals should go to the emus because they had been winning the rounds. The story was becoming bigger than the actual operation, and the government didn't like what it was seeing. After the initial operation, the military withdrew its machine guns, but the farmers still had a problem. The emus hadn't disappeared, so the government eventually authorized another attempt. The soldiers returned. Once again, they faced enormous flocks moving across the wheat-growing country. The operation continued into December, but it still wasn't producing the decisive victory everyone had imagined. According to Major Meredith's final report, 9,860 rounds had been fired for 986 confirmed kills, a figure that later historians have treated cautiously and that should not be presented as an unquestionable exact count. On December 10, 1932, Meredith was recalled. The military operation was over. So, did the emus actually defeat the Australian army? Not literally. There was no surrender ceremony. No EMU flag was raised over Canberra. And this wasn't a conventional war. It was a government-backed wildlife control operation. But, as a story, the emus absolutely won the public relations battle. The military had arrived expecting a quick solution. Instead, the birds remained difficult to control, ammunition was expended, weapons malfunctioned, and the operation was eventually abandoned. The emu population survived, and the episode became one of the strangest stories in Australian history. But beneath the humor, there was a serious lesson. The problem wasn't simply that the soldiers couldn't shoot accurately. The bigger problem was that military technology was poorly suited to the problem. A machine gun is extraordinarily effective against a concentrated human formation. But what happens when your target can run across enormous distances, split into smaller groups, disappear into vegetation, and simply move somewhere else? The battlefield changes completely. The army had brought the wrong tool for the job, and the emus didn't need military strategy. They simply behaved like emus. Today, the Great Emu War is remembered as one of history's strangest military episodes. 3 soldiers, 2 machine guns, thousands of emus, and a campaign that became famous, not because of a glorious victory, but because of how spectacularly strange it was. The soldiers weren't cowards, the farmers weren't foolish, and the government wasn't literally fighting a bird nation. This was a desperate attempt to solve a genuine agricultural problem, using an extraordinary method, but history sometimes produces stories so bizarre that they sound completely fictional. In 1932, Australia really did send machine guns against emus, and somehow, the emus survived. This was the Great Emu War, and perhaps the strangest lesson of all is this: sometimes the most powerful weapon in the world is still the wrong weapon for the problem. History isn't just something to learn, it's a story to experience.